Brece Clark, and I'm an educator with New Roots Institute, located here in Michigan, and I've been vegan since 2015. Kind of what led up to that was I grew up on a small dairy farm as a kid. I always was around animals. My family transitioned to horse training in like the mid-90s, so I grew up training horses professionally. In college, I watched a video called Meet Your Meat. I think it's a PETA video, and that was kind of that snap you out of the matrix moment. Not to say that it turned me vegan on the spot, but it definitely broke through some important like psychological barriers. But my career path has always been working with animals. So I just love learning about them, I love interacting with them, I like studying them. And I was always, I was trying to leverage my strengths. I grew up training them and understanding them, so how can I pursue a career path that does that? So I started working at a zoo in college while I was studying for major ed chose was wildlife biology. I thought I wanted to work either in a zoo or maybe like in the DNR or something like that. So I also did an internship down in Texas at a wildlife rehab center. So I was learning more about people who were taking care of animals. And then I went back to horse training a little bit, and I was trying to like find my place with who I wanted to be. Started teaching kids like how to train horses in a more holistic manner. Then I took a job down here in Ann Arbor at the Humane Society of Huron Valley as a cruelty rescue officer. So like long story short to this point is I'm questioning our relationship to animals and wildlife and domestic animals. But then I started doing my own training at a farm that was also raising lambs and eggs for meat and eggs. And my friend and I, who was working there, we really started to like talk about animal rights in a different way. This is like around 2015-ish. And I started watching a lot more videos, Mercy for Animals, animal equality. And I just like came to this conclusion. I had an epiphany when I was training a horse in a pretty violent fashion of like, what am I doing? Can I justify causing this horse all this harm? All these videos are telling me that animal use in the food industry and riding and zoos and circuses is bad, and like I was starting to agree. Like it was hard to agree because I was doing it. But I don't know, I just kind of made that decision at a certain point. Like, I want to be more like those people than these people. And I went vegan and jumped right into activism.
So how did you hear about veganism?
Well, I had gone vegetarian in 2012. Yeah, sometime around there. So, and then I started watching videos of these groups like Mercy for Animals and Animal Equality. And so the word vegan started to come up. I stumbled across the work of Will Tuttle too, and Howard Lyman. I read Howard Lyman's book, Mad Cowboy, and The World Peace Diet, Will Tuttle. So like those two books were pretty important for me to like identify with. Howard Lyman being a former cattle rancher, Will Tuttle coming from this mindfulness, Eastern sort of philosophical thought, and like I just wanted to be kinder in the world, and I wanted to align myself with people that were progressive values, if you will. I guess I was trying to model after those folks.
Wow, cool. And you just didn't make the connection with dairy until later, it sounds like.
Yeah, it seems like the meat industry is the easiest one to identify as being cruel. Like obviously the end result is the dead animal. But with dairy, yeah, there's a bit more like undercover work in terms of those animals get killed. And the exploitation, I think, is something that has to be taught. Or at least, I don't know, for me, I needed to have it spelled out.
Yeah, I think that's the case for pretty much everybody, yeah. As far as like your work with horses, I find it interesting because I live near the Tryon Equestrian Center, which is a fairly new place in western North Carolina in the foothills there. So I'm like kind of excited to hear a little bit about your perspective on this. Is there any chance that this at all is ever like potentially something that can be done ethically?
Well, I definitely went down that path of there's got to be a more humane way to train than the training methods that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. So my dad is an old cowboy trainer. And so his influences were like the books from like the early 1900s and before that, and those training methods. He was a real big reader, and he was always studying different techniques and how. I think there's a lot of like, we can get into this later maybe, but there's a lot of romanticizing with the Western culture, and also I think there's a lot of like power dynamics too. People rely on violence who are taught that, like, even with like kids, you know, that the way to train kids is if they do wrong to whack them. You know, to think about it in this, they have to be in a submissive state and know the rules, and if you go outside the rules and there are severe consequences. My dad had that kind of framework. So when horses would react in a negative way, they didn't want the rider to be riding them, they were afraid, they would do something, quote, wrong, then there's severe punishment for that. And every horse is different, right? They're each individuals, and you really get to see that as a trainer. There are some horses that are naturally going to be more docile and easier to train. Some are going to have more of those flight instincts. They're going to be skittish and afraid of everything. Some will respond to you in an anger way. You know, they might try to bite or kick out. So there's a lot of variation there. And when it was necessary, my dad and I would use a lot of pain methods. So, I mean, it can be as extreme as making them lay down and hog tying them. And when I say make them lay down, it sounds like, oh, like, here, lay down, but it's pretty awful. You know, you have to turn their head around and tie their head to the saddle and tip them over. And then they're thrashing around, they're scared, they're trying to fight that feeling, and so, you know, you're hanging on for dear life until you finally get them down, and then you would make them stay down, and just make them realize that whatever you do on top of them, there's no getting out. There's no point in resisting. It's not going to stop. So I grew up with a lot of that, and I have a lot more examples to give of those pretty violent measures of training horses. I didn't like that. Even as a kid, I didn't like that. I don't think my dad liked that either, but it was effective, you know, and it was the only way that he knew to achieve the desired result. He's training horses for other people. Other people want to ride without getting hurt themselves, so they need a submissive horse that listens to commands and does what we ask them to. So there's a lot of that. But as a kid, I mean, I was crying. You know, I was crying when we would have to do these awful things, or I would see him really lay into a horse and start ripping on their mouth and causing all these sores and seeing them behave in fear. And I remember expressing my discomfort about that, and there's kind of this culture of suck it up, you know, bite your lower lip and move on. Like, yeah, life's hard, nothing is given freely, this is what we have to do. But I remember just like having such an internal conflict, but then, you know, like, we're social animals, so I'd get over it. You know, this is what my dad's doing, this is what my friends are doing, then I guess I'm gonna do it. You know, and I also liked a lot of it. You know, I liked riding, you know, full blast across the field with the wind just rushing through your hair and that feeling of this energy beneath you that is a little bit dangerous. You know, or on the flip side of that, the peacefulness of walking through the woods on a horse. You know, it's the same feeling I get today when I'm out hiking on foot. It's just that communion with nature, that riding a horse, especially as a little kid too, like the freedom that it gave me. You know, my friends are all stuck, you know, only doing what their parents allow them to. Oh, don't get too close to the road. Shit, I'm running horses down the road. You know, I'm full blast, and, you know, my aunt and uncle, because we all lived on this gravel dirt road, my aunt and uncle and my grandparents, they'd see me just flying past the house, you know, on a horse, and wow. So there was a lot of just of power and independence around that. So like I said, I'm getting a lot out of it too. Mm-hmm. When I eventually started my own training practice, I had learned about some of the natural horsemanship methods, the Pat Pirelli, Clinton Anderson, Buck Brannaman, some of these figures, and they're saying, okay, we can achieve the same result as your dad, maybe even a better result, because the horse isn't responding out of fear, they're responding out of trust. So I'm like, well, that sounds better. I want to do that. You know, I don't want to hurt animals either if I can avoid it. And so I started doing some of those methods, and they would work to a certain point, They require a lot of patience, which I maybe could have had more of. And so I felt like I couldn't achieve the desired result without the violence. Even though I could achieve some of the results, there still wasn't getting me a horse that, when a horse would really challenge me, like I was talking earlier, they're all individuals. So like, for example, I trained this horse named Glow, and right from scratch. And all these natural horsemanship methods worked really well on her. I hardly ever had to scold her. She understood my commands. We started to work in sync. But then I had this horse, Legend, who had previous riding experience, and he had a lot of trauma from it. And those natural horsemanship methods went right over his head. There would have been no way to make him a safe horse for people to ride without doing some damage. And also, like, I learned some of these natural horsemanship trainers do also go to those lengths. They just don't tell people about it. So I kind of started to see it like as a bit of a sham. But I'll tell you, it was the very last thing for me to stop doing as a vegan. Like, I probably could say that when I started being vegan was after 2015, because that's just when I cut out animal products and stopped wearing leather. But I was still riding horses, so like, was I really a vegan? Like, did I really understand vegan values? Probably not until the end of 2016, when my touring partner with Animal Equality started to really challenge me on this idea of ethical horse riding. And honestly, it was really, really tough, and like, we fought a lot. She'll testify to this. I was not an easy win, because I had a lot of things about, I felt like a lot of people in the animal rights movement were anthropomorphizing them. I'm like, I know them better than everyone else. And I think sometimes we do that, to be fair, but.
And for anybody listening that might not understand what that even means, is that just giving them more attributes than they actually have?
Yeah, it's assigning them human qualities. Yeah. So like, I don't know,
like whether or not they care if you're riding them, kind of thing.
See, horses, really, all animals, they live in the moment a lot better than we do. So it can seem like they're having a terrible time when really they've kind of accepted their circumstances in some ways. Oh, here's a good example. So horses, and I've seen this done with elephants and even cows on and pigs, cows especially, on slaughter trucks. And you'll see that there's tears coming out of their eyes. Yeah. They don't cry like us. That's not an emotion. They don't express that emotion through tears like we do. Yeah. It's usually because there's an irritant in their eye, and so they're just flushing it out. That's actually the best example I can think of.
Yeah, I've heard of that, like they don't actually cry.
Yeah.
Emotionally. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's a good analogy, or a good way of describing it. As far as your friend trying to convince you, it sounds like there was that went on for a year or so, like where you were still riding them. You were saying, I'm vegan, but I'm still riding horses. Eventually they won. They convinced you. Yes. Or you convinced yourself, or somehow.
They were definitely the push I needed, but it had to come internally. Yeah. And yeah, it was actually really hard because, and like, I went through a period of depression around it, because it's like, it's a big identity thing. The thing that has made me cool has been I'm the horse person. Yeah. I know how to ride. I'm a really good rider. Really good trainer. My family is invested in this. My brother is a professional trainer. My dad's a professional. My sister barrel races. Like, it's a family thing. Plus, I had all these lesson students, because just prior to working at the Humane Society, I was giving riding lessons at our family equine business. So we had this huge ranch where we would train, we would board them, which means like a dog boarding place. Other people would keep their horses with us. We would do public trail rides, so anybody could come for $20, and we would put you on a safe horse, and we would all go in a group out through the trails and walk, and so we had that. And then I was training kids, any ages. Youngest I had was a 4-year-old, how to safely ride and how to learn how to recognize horse behavior. And so I had this kind of like community that I had built around my idea of training horses and being as kind as possible, as firm as necessary. That was my slogan. And so for me to say that was wrong was saying, well, now you guys are wrong.
There's no right way.
Yeah, it was tough.
Wow.
Yeah. but I knew I had to do it because it wasn't consistent. I was just logically making excuses in myself, inside my head. What do they say? I was bargaining a lot. I was self-bargaining. I was like, what if I just do it a little bit? Or, I only go on trail rides with my dad and stuff like that.
Yeah. You're making me think of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Loss.
I'll also mention as well that a book that was really influential was Ren Hurst. I think a lot of people who have heard about veganism and horse riding are familiar with her work. She's the only one that I know of who's written a book about it and done any speaking. And that book actually was really important to be that final push, that tipping point, like, oh, it makes sense. Yeah, it's a phenomenal book. It's called Riding on the Power of Others.
I had this conversation pretty recently, actually, with my friend Jessica, who she went vegan in the early 90s. She watched like 24 hours over the course of like 2 weeks of all this footage of what happens to animals in various like industries, right? And she got super immersed in it. And she said when she walked away from that, she couldn't look at people the same anymore. And I thought back to when I watched like Dominion and Earthlings back to back. And I don't know why I did that, but it really kind of made me realize that any animal exploitation, no matter how innocent it may seem, inevitably normalizes exploitation to the point that becomes abusive at some point. When you normalize that, then somebody else thinks it's okay, and then somebody else thinks it's okay, and then next thing you know, it just becomes out of control. With the horse training, it sounds like, you were trying to rationalize it at the end there, like there must be a way to do it compassionately. And there are some people that say they're vegan and still ride horses. Is it kind of like you're normalizing something that's going to get out of control?
What I resonate with is when we put labels on animals, then there's a lot that a lot of our treatment can qualify with that label. So if we say that a horse is our property, right? If we put like commodification status on a horse, then that gives us the range of treating them really nicely or treating them really poorly, within the bounds of whatever the law is. I mean, they give us, in some species, not all species, obviously. For me, the thing that was really important to understand was the status of animals in society. And it was that seeing horses as a usable entity, that I don't need their permission. I can just ride them if I want to, or I can manipulate them to let me to ride them. That's, to me, where I think it cascades, is giving yourself this hierarchy over them.
You don't think you'll ever ride a horse again?
Haven't yet, don't plan to. I've certainly had plenty of opportunities. My dad, is always, hey, when are we gonna go for a ride? And it's so well-meaning, it's well-intentioned, and I would love, I question myself all the time, like, when my dad dies, am I gonna regret not going on that one more ride? I do, honestly. It's a big sacrifice that I'm holding true to. It helps to know that my dad knows why I don't ride with him, and we have had a lot of conversations about it. He takes the position that he agrees with me on all of it. He'll always come back and say, it's a job, and we all have to have a job. I gotta go to work. I don't like working, so they have to go to work even if they don't like working. To which I then say, consensually go to your job, and you can choose a different job if you want to. There's no choice in the matter. For me, it's all about the consent to engage in this activity. And it's so telling too, like, in order to engage in this activity with the horse, and you rely on pain tools, like a bit, or, mostly the bit. If you need that bit, or you need because some people I can hear will be like, well, that's why I ride in a hackamore. Hackamore just means it doesn't have a bit, but there's still a chain under here, and that chain is designed to hurt the nerves underneath their chin. So all of those things are needed, and if that horse doesn't do what you want them to do, you're going to hurt them. In the horse world, we make that pain under their chin really severe, or the bit in their mouth really severe, or we spin them in a circle and we kick the outside of their body and make them spin even faster. And spin and spin and spin until they're so dizzy, and it's almost like that dizziness kind of like, whoa, like being dizzy for a horse scares the heck out of them, because they're a prey animal and they need to be able to flee, and if they're dizzy, then it's like, holy crap, stress overload.
It being a part of your identity, it relates to so many other parts of life where it's like food is a big part of people's identity, or at least part of their culture. So what happened next? Now we're at about like, what, 2016? You're like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. And you essentially had to like completely change your life, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened there? What happened after that?
Well, to really answer that, because there's a big life change that really sparked as well. It gave me the confidence to do something that I had really thought about for a long time, but didn't have, I don't know, just the right moment. It wasn't the right moment. If I go all the way back, so my story starts at being a young kid, but a kid that was very different in certain ways. But these differences were embraced. But what I'm trying to say is I was born a different gender than what I present now. So I'm a trans person, and as a kid, I was that girl that played football. Right? And I was good. I was the best player on the team, and it was really embraced. It was like, oh, you know, they're gonna be a little different. But my dad played football in college, and so like it was really encouraged, and I wanted that. I felt that. I was the rough and tough. I was, you know, hanging with the guys, being in their world, also being in this other world. I was just a tough mentality kind of person. And when I got to high school, I was in a relationship with another girl, and it was secret. So I'm from middle of nowhere. I'm graduated with 80 students, kind of middle of nowhere. At that time, which this would have been like 2003, 2004, it's not accepted to be gay in this community. So it's really religious and conservative values. There was a kid who tried to come out in high school, and everybody hazed him. He was sat on drinking fountains. They duct taped him to the wall. It's a terrible story. And I saw that happening. So there's no way that I was gonna risk this social ostracism to say that I'm in a relationship with this girl, because I was kind of like high profile status. I was the jock. I was best in basketball and mock Olympics. I was class athlete, class jock, whatever it's called. And so like I couldn't risk that identity that I had built up in the community. So when I went to college, I started to find people that were more open-minded and didn't care. In fact, it was a club on campus called rugby. And so I found rugby, and the people there, it was like maybe 50-50. 50% of the girls were gay, 50% were straight. But it was just this loving atmosphere. The two male coaches were so supportive. And so I dove into this community and started to feel like, wow, I can be myself. And that was hard in and of itself, you know, taking that back to small town Michigan. It gave me the confidence to be different and to embrace this idea of, well, I am who I am, take it or leave it. So that's the story in terms of gender identity all the way until 2016. And after I had this shift with my values and relationship to animals, and if I'm going to be true to that, I have to be true to this other aspect of me. And so I decided to make the transition. And there was so much liberation in this period of time, so much of synchronicity coming in alignment. I found a group of people who were also vegan, who embraced me, who could connect with me on such a deep level. The touring partner, Shura, she embraced me, and she was the first person that I said, hey, I think I might be this. And most of the people that when I came out about this to were like, yeah, we knew. You know, because I was living this double life in a lot of ways. Like, I'm presenting, I had cut my hair before the transition, I was wearing mostly guy clothes, and it's like, I'm living that, but I still have the pronouns, and I can't grow facial hair. Like, I can't really be who I want to be, who I feel internally. So once I could kind of like add that layer of authenticity, everything just came in alignment. And veganism was a big part of that too.
You're married now, right?
Yep. My wife's probably here. Speaking of, her ears were ringing.
How does this relate to, I guess, veganism for you?
So there's some pretty deep parallels, I think. With animals, especially horses, what we love about them is that they're majestic, right? Like all the movies, all the covers of those movies is the horse running across the field. You know, you think about like Black Beauty or the Black Stallion, or those films glorify that aspect of them, and rightly so, it is beautiful. But the very thing that riding does is it puts clamps on that. It restricts it, because they're doing what you want them to do, not what they want to do. The freedom, the autonomy is lost. I relate to that in that for me to be my authentic self, to put it differently, for me not to be my authentic self meant that I had to live with these clamps, with these social expectations, with you have to be a certain way in the world in order to be respected or to be loved by your family. Challenging those social norms is scary as hell. Yeah. And it really takes a sense of bravery to remove them and say, nah, what's inside is a better version than that. And for horses, I think that's how I look at it. That wild, free horse is a better version than the horse that's doing circles in an arena. Yeah, is confined to being my servant. I think there's so much more depth than making animals be our servants. And I felt like I was serving the status quo, you know, and breaking through that shell with my identity is a similar what I needed to break out of that shell with. Look, I grew up training horses, and I'm changing my mind.
I think this is so spot on with becoming vegan in a non-vegan world, even. Dr. Joel Fuhrman, I quote him a lot saying this. It's like you almost have to be a leader to do this. And I kind of add to it, otherwise you just follow what everybody else is doing. Or you just become a sycophant, and placate people, even if it's something as grotesque as needlessly ingesting the body parts, organs, and secretions of an animal, like, mindlessly. So it does take a strong identity. It does take being who you really want to be. And I think children ultimately don't even want to do what parents are making them do. It's like they don't necessarily have a choice in the say, and they become acclimated to this taste and this behavior. And then they grow up thinking it's natural, it's normal. But deep down inside, there's dissonance. Vegans, more than anybody, understand cognitive dissonance. And I think you do as well now. Like you've fought through so much cognitive dissonance, and now you're like that free horse. Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. Now, I also like to ask people, did you notice any physiological, mental, or emotional changes after going vegan? I think you've already kind of hit on some of these things, but just to make sure, what kind of physiological, mental, or emotional changes after going vegan, 100%?
Yeah. A lot of what you said, too, with, like, you had mentioned earlier that you had watched Dominion and Earthlings back to back, and my touring partner, Shura, made me watch Earthlings. Dominion came a few years later, and I watched a lot of that slaughterhouse footage, and that's initially what brought me out when I was in college, was watching Meet Your Meat. And I think there's a lot of use to that. I think for a lot of people that watch that, that might be the first time they're really seeing violence to animals. For me, I felt that too on an industrial level, systemic level, but it also brought up a lot of pain from doing that as a kid, like actually being the one that inflicts the pain. Because, as a little kid, I don't have a lot of strength, and I'm riding this 1,500-pound horse, maybe that's too much, maybe a 1,000-pound horse. Sometimes all I could do was use every ounce of strength. For example, my dad would train horses for a racetrack. So he'd get these 2-year-old horses, and all he was tasked to do was get them rideable for a jockey, meaning they don't need to know anything more than the basics. And they didn't want their urge to run to be quelched or squashed. And so when my dad and I would ride these young horses out on a field, they needed to know how to canter with a person on their back. Well, when they see a field and you're telling them to go faster, sometimes, a lot of times, they'll bolt. And that's just where they're full dead-on sprinting. And there's nothing you can do to slow them down. It's the scariest feeling in the world, man, because it's like, what do? Like, do you hang on and hope that, you know, they eventually slow down, or do you bolt? Do you jump off?
Wow.
Sometimes I would take that option. I would jump off just out of fear, and of course you're hitting the ground, you know, 20 miles an hour.
Oh.
You know,
Wow.
so that was scary in of itself. But so that they're running, I'm crying, I'm like feeling so much terror inside, and the only thing that I can do in that moment, I remember like my dad riding a horse next to me because I'm crying, I can't get him to stop, and he's trying to guide me on his horse. Seesaw, God, I remember him saying seesaw, seesaw, which means take your reins and yank them back and forth so that the bit is just doing as much damage in their mouth as it can inflict. And I just remember just doing that and doing every little, like putting all my muscle into it and battling anger and fear and panic. And if I did get them to slow down, then I had to punish them because they just did a bad behavior. If they do that with somebody else, you know, they could really hurt that person. And so now I'm spinning them in that circle like I talked about, and I'm just laying into them, and I'm half crying, half yelling, God damn you, mother, how dare you do this to me? You know, you don't do this ever again, motherfucker. And I'm like 9 years old.
Wow. Wow.
You know, and then I remember also on a horse that would be misbehaving, maybe they were bucking every so often. They were trying to get me off every couple steps. And I remember my dad saying, just get him back to the barn. And that meant he's going to learn what he did today is bad. Wow. And that's when we would take it a step further and lay him down if he's really bad, or lash into him, or make him run and run and run. And every time he does that, just beat the hell out of him until they stop doing that kind of stuff. And seeing it and doing it, when I watched that slaughterhouse footage and seeing animals harmed, it flashed these memories that I had suppressed. Because I didn't think about these on a regular basis, but it brought back all these memories of really enjoying this thing that we had as a family together. And because when they didn't disagree, the horses that is, it was a beautiful thing. I mean, I showed in 4-H you were being scored on how well your horse was moving and listened to you and stopped and, you know, cantered right off of a standstill, and like all these things that demonstrate that you and this horse are one, and they're submissive, they get you. And when that all worked together, dude, it was a beautiful thing. It was wonderful to feel that. But so I like had that, and then I had this other experience. And when people talk about riding horses, most of the time they have that good experience because they have a finished horse. Finished meaning they've gone through the training process. They don't see that other side that was necessary to get them to this state. So naturally they have nothing to compare it to, and they'll say, well, my horse loves to be ridden. Yeah, of course it looks like that. You didn't see the full process.
It's an illusion, yeah.
It's an illusion, absolutely. It's a magic trick.
Do you think treating animals this way and being kind of disconnected from the harm that you're inflicting to get them to behave, do you think that transfers into treating humans different?
Probably, yeah. I mean, the idea that, well, I mean, you could probably take the example of like raising kids and how we're moving in this direction of don't hit your kids, though a lot of people still do. But like there's a lot of studies coming out showing the harms of that. It's not a perfect comparison because that kid isn't your slave, you know, or like, I don't know. I guess I probably could argue both sides of it. You know, that kid has become conditioned to live within the social norms, which the horse is having to live within the social norms. But yeah, certainly, I mean, violence begets violence, as they say.
Yeah. And then the reverse would be, do you think after becoming vegan and really embracing this new empathy with animals, maybe transferred to being more empathetic with humans?
I think for me it would have been the human part first because I was going through that LGBT journey, that arc of embracing other people and being more open-minded and stepping into these other cultures. You know, college for me was a big awakening.
You became vegan and then you did that.
Well, that was a piece of the whole LGBT arc.
Okay, so it was like the final piece.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. And do you feel like veganism maybe helped you finalize that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, is it ever over? You know. Like,
Okay.
You know, like, is it? Yeah, I definitely. But it was a big milestone. Let's say.
Do you feel like you are more empathetic to humans though, now that you are allowing yourself to be 100% empathetic towards animals?
Yeah. I would say it's a little bit different with animals for me because animals don't have, well, I actually don't like this phrasing, they don't have a voice, because they do have a voice, and my job as a trainer was to squash that voice.
Yeah.
They're talking to us all the time.
Yeah.
You know, they're communicating their needs all day. It's just how do we listen? Do we know how to listen? They're much more victimized in my mind than humans, because they are the ultimate slave. They are the ultimate no freedom, no choice. That we feed them a certain food, they don't get choice in their food. They're staying in a stall or in a pasture. They don't get to move where they want to move. Like everything about them is controlled, and there's no way out of that. Like there's no way they can graduate out of that or work their way out of that. You know what I mean? They're just in this perpetual system of exploitation. So I feel stronger about my advocacy or my thoughts about their victimization than people.
What was your new career after all this?
Yeah, it was hard, and I'm glad you asked that because I found myself like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
My whole career up to that point was like industries that exploit animals. Like, I'm a professional horse trainer. This is what I've done for 26 years. I've taken all this training and the classes and courses, and I've lived the life. Like now where? But I did do work within like animal protection agencies. So I did come to Ann Arbor I worked for the Humane Society as a cruelty rescue officer. So this county, Washtenaw County, has a really unique program where if there's ever a wild animal who's in distress, is orphaned, is injured, there's a 24-hour rescue service. And I worked the weekends. So I would work 4 on a Friday, all day, all night until Monday at 8 a.m.
Wow.
So I'm getting up in the middle of the night to go rescue these little orphan chipmunks that somebody found or something, or a bat in someone's house. It was a wild couple of years for sure. So I loved that work, and I learned so much about wildlife and how much they needed our help, and like their difficult status within like communities. Like, are they a nuisance? Do we enjoy wildlife? Do we protect them? Do we shoot them? Like, there's such a contentious debate even within this progressive area of Ann Arbor. Like there was a deer cull a couple years ago because they felt like there's too many in the city and people fought over that. But yeah, I mean, as they say, we tore down their home to build ours. So they're trying to build their homes and our eaves and our attics, and there's nowhere for them to go. And I feel really passionate about like the food system because of how much land space we take up and crowd them out. Most of that is not, like, urban development is only 1% of Earth's habitable land that we use. It's 45% is agriculture.
Yeah, and the majority of that's animal agriculture.
Yeah.
Over like, it was like 80% or something.
80%, yeah. So like I kind of knew that space was there. But it's hard to make a living at that. There's not that many jobs for that. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just become like an activist, and I'll join a group like Animal Equality or Mercy for Animals. And so I started paying attention to those job boards and found a touring position with Animal Equality where we would travel to different colleges within a region and show students factory farm footage and slaughterhouse footage in their virtual reality headsets. And we would, have conversations with the students and And it was a wild job, just going from university to university and staying in Airbnbs and people's couches. And that's where most of that growth happened with the horse training and also just better understanding. I was still a little bit like, backyard eggs are all right. And
What year is this about? Is this before you went vegan?
yeah, so this would have been like late 2016, 2017. But I pretty much went like vegan to activism pretty fast.
It sounded like you said something along the lines of, you said something that made it sound like you were still working with the horses.
Yeah, up until Animal Equality, I was training horses.
Yeah.
Animal Equality hired me, and knowing that was my job. I think back on that, and I was like, dang, they really took a chance on me. And it was a good example. It's something I should probably reflect on even more with my role now as working with young people, is like, even if somebody is at a certain place, there's like, let them have that journey. Like, to be in our community, they don't have to be vegan yet. Yeah. You know, like, as long as the messaging is clear, like, if the messaging is good and it's well delivered, they'll come to it on their own.
So you're with Animal Equality. So what happened next?
Got back from Animal Equality, the first tour, and that's when I had that depressive state. For about 2 months, I was lost because Shura had challenged me about horse riding and ethical farming, backyard eggs, regenerative beef, although they didn't use that term back then. So the humane way of raising animals for food. I didn't know where to go. I didn't really want to be all up in it. I was so sure that factory farming was messed up, but I wasn't ready to say like all animal use was wrong until after that tour and that period of time. That might have been when I read Ren Hurst's book, Writing on the Power of Others. I think I might have read The Humane Cowboy at that time, and started watching more YouTube videos and content creators, and kind of seeing that these people aren't weird. They're not like extremists. Like, you know what I mean? I even had some biases against this group that I was kind of supporting, like with Animal Equality, and kind of representing during that tour. So I had a lot of change happen in that period of time, and started to embrace it. Stopped riding horses. So then there was an opportunity to join Animal Equality again for another tour, but in California. And so I signed up for that, and it was with the same person, Shura. And it's such a cool difference between the first tour and the second tour, even though they were only 3 months apart. Because that first tour, man, we did not get along. We argued, it was tense, it was awkward, we didn't relate to one another, and like we were with each other 24/7. And then the second tour, when I had grown a bit, was night and day. We became best friends, and we're still like not best friends, but we're still really, really good friends today because of all that growth that happened. And she recognized a little bit of like how she didn't present, because she was in a stronger position, vegan place than me. She had understood the principles to a greater depth than me during that first tour. And so she reflected in that 3-month period too of how she could have communicated it better to me, and maybe not has been quite so Gary Francione about it, who I later came to embrace and really loved and needed. So it's just like different activists, different methods, they're needed at different points in that journey.
Does that cover all the way up till now?
After that tour, then I started working at a farm sanctuary here in Michigan, and it was perfect for me because I was like, dang, one, I didn't even know about sanctuaries really. You know, I kind of knew about them, but didn't really understand the culture of them and the importance of them. And I just went on a tour, I think, or maybe it was one of their events, and started talking to people, and I was like, yeah, like I grew up on a dairy farm, I grew up training horses, grew up like having all this real experience of animal care. You know, if you have any positions open, and it was like a couple weeks later, they're like, hey, do you want to work here? And it was perfect because, yeah, I had this mindset that was so far removed from my roots, but what I had learned in those roots could transfer to working there, and knowing like how to handle a horse, like how to put on a halter, how to trim hooves, like how to look for lace, like all these things that someone that's maybe coming to the philosophy first wouldn't have known how to properly care for these residents. So it worked out great. I worked there for about a year before I continued to do that, but also found an education program called the Educated Choices Program that Lorena Muki has started. And that was going into classrooms in my area talking about our food system and animals that are abused in the food system and how it relates to the environment and health. So I kind of did those two things in tandem for a number of years until COVID, which cut the program. So then I went full-time with the sanctuary. And then last year, this time, I joined a similar education program to ECP called New Roots Institute, formerly known as Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. And that's what I'm doing now.
Okay. And what's your title with them?
I'm the lead educator for Michigan.
That's quite the activist journey there.
Yeah.
This organization, is that all they do is work in, like universities educating people about factory farming? Is that right?
Yep. So our mission is to end factory farming by empowering this next generation of leaders. Okay. So we, as educators, we go into high schools and college campuses, and we give these classroom lessons about factory farming, which surprisingly, like, it's wild how few people actually know about factory farming, even today. You know, it's just, you'd think it would be a little bit more mainstream, but it's honestly not. Like, we live in our vegan bubble sometimes, and when you step out there, you're like, dang, like, we really are, like, out of what everyone else is doing, you know. What we left behind still exists, you know what I mean?
So, especially when you go to try to order something somewhere.
Yeah, right? I know. It's definitely getting better, but still. So we go in there and we give kind of we lay the groundwork of the facts. And it's more than just giving facts, though, as most educators know. You have to ask questions. You have to get them to think about it in their own way and relate it to their own experience. So it's a lot of question asking, a lot of, discussion orientation.
You said something earlier that made me think of, like, meeting people where they're at is like something that you've learned to be really good at.
It's one of our mottos, meet people where they are, for sure. It's something that I definitely still struggle with.
Yes, I think we all do.
Yeah, it is.
And asking questions, you said, right? Yeah. That's something that's been coming up a lot in interviews. Serena Farb and I talked about it. Wintran talked about it in length with me about it. I hate to derail you, but
oh, you're good.
But I just feel like it's kind of part of what you were talking about, and again here, that made me think of that. And it would be cool to kind of give people an example of that. So for me, real quick, what I've learned, and it's so hard to remember to do this in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
But it's like, do you agree it's wrong to hurt animals needlessly? That is the most simple question. And I always forget, like, I'm getting better at remembering. Like, I just want to react. Like, I just want to, like, educate. Like, I just want to, like, inform them of what's really going on or whatever. And that just simple question is, to me, just kind of really helps put things where they need to be. Do you have something like that? It's
been helpful to read a lot work from, like, Benny Malone. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's similar, I guess, to Earthling Ed and some of those guys, and who have put labels to a lot of the excuses. That's been helpful for me personally.
Like fallacies?
Fallacies, yeah. So I listen to Vegan Gains and listen to him debate, and I really, for me personally, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. Like, yes. I'll just be laying in bed and I'll just be listening to people debate veganism. I love it. Love it.
Like the militant vegan.
Yeah.
She's really good.
Yes, yeah. I just listened to her in Vegan Gains. Yeah. And Vegan Gains says a pretty controversial thing in there about horseback riding that I've been in the comments a little bit challenging. But yeah, so I think it's helpful to kind of put labels to them and to be able to break those down and have, like, rehearsed questions that you can ask to them. So, like, if a kid says, yeah, but they taste so good, that's a pretty common one. Yeah. I say, yeah, I get it, they do taste good. Do you think that a sensory pleasure justifies harming somebody else? What if I really enjoyed kicking my dog, and every time I kick that dog and I hear their ribs crack, it just makes me feel so excited and joyful? Would it be all right if I continue to do that simply because it gave me pleasure? No, I wouldn't do that. Okay, so now connect that to your taste pleasure. Isn't it just a sensory pleasure in the same way?
Is there, like, just a handful, or is there a whole bunch of these things?
I think there's probably like, I don't know, 11, 12 of them that kind of come up, these logical fallacies. There's like the nirvana fallacy, which is the world is never going to be perfect. You know, vegans hurt animals too, and the crop deaths though. You'll get a lot of this from Hunter, because Hunter does this on TikTok.
Okay, yeah.
He just will open up his screen and it'll say, "There's no argument against veganism, debate me." And then he'll just bring on people. It's helpful to find like where they're at, like what are their values? Do you want to see the world more kind? Do you believe we should treat animals with respect? Here's some information about nutrition. Let's say hypothetically that we didn't need to eat animals to be healthy. Would that change your views given what you just said about respect and kindness? You know, help them kind of tease out like what their barriers are and what they care about.
I mentioned Faraz earlier, so I guess you're familiar with ASAP, right?
Yep.
I wonder, like, I can't help but wonder, you know, being vegan linked and all, isn't there some way you guys can like merge?
Yeah, there's definitely been discussion between the two organizations.
Oh, good.
What I think we do things a little bit different. His approach is a little bit different. He's a bit more like student organization focused, like let's create ASAP chapters. Let's go into schools and give the information and then recruit into this leadership academy, which is really like our bread and butter, if you will. We recruit when we go into the schools the most motivated, those that care the most to join us over the summer, which is what we're gearing up for right now, an 8-week learning course all about food system reform from the lens of factory farming. So we show them the impacts. Again, for some of them it'll be repetitive, like they'll have learned this already, but they'll maybe learn a bit more deeper. And then they'll learn from 4 different career tracks of how people are addressing factory farming and changing our food system, making more plant-based options available, overcoming some of those social barriers. It's kind of like a advocacy pipeline where we want to see the students come through this, and then we place them with aligned and adjacent organizations.
So you might actually place somebody in Faraz's
Yep.
ASAP. Oh, that's cool. So you already maybe work together or something? So I have a website called VeganLinked, right? And it's a geo-based membership directory. You could add a listing for an organization and you could add these events, and it's all geo-based. And I'm hoping like ASAP can get in that, and maybe other organizations like the one you're dealing with.
We would love that, because we're always looking for students to join this academy first and foremost, because that academy really gets them in the advocacy mindset. And we bring in speakers from all different organizations throughout the program. It's divided into 4 blocks, 4-hour blocks, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we've got like Jasmine from our hen house coming in to do a thing about podcasting and activism through that medium. Where we have Rachel Atchison, who's in the mayor's office in New York City, going to talk about policy and the Plant Fridays that they've implemented in New York City public schools. There's so many different groups, and this academy brings them together in one condensed, nice package that students can step into and really open their minds to how much room there is for them in the movement against factory farming.
So many career paths.
Yeah.
And how it relates to so many different ones,
Yeah, we try to help them figure out like what they're good at, what they want to be good at, what they're passionate about, and connect them with the right people and use the training that they get from us to be successful and to have that infrastructure behind them to fall back on, because they get lifetime support with us once they graduate.
Wow, lifetime, huh? That's cool. And what is the URL for that?
NewRootsInstitute.org.
And they can find you through there, or you have your own social stuff, or?
They can find me there. I do the thing that I do on my own is I host a podcast.
Okay, cool.
It's a small podcast. It's not big. It's a hobby, but that's where I kind of air out my own personal stuff.
Yeah. What's that called?
It's called Everybody Hates Vegans. It's on YouTube. We don't do like a video recording. It's all just audio. But I post on YouTube with our pictures, and then we're on Apple and Spotify. And I kind of do similar kind of to what you do, is I bring in people that have inspiring stories and give them a place to share.
And you have it on other platforms, you said?
Yep, Apple and Spotify.
Well, man, this has been fun, man. I didn't know what I was getting into. It was kind of last minute on this run. And
yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to share like the arc, you know, and if I were to give anybody just kind of like a piece of advice, if you're a young person, continue to find who you are. Like, just stretch yourself. Go to those uncomfortable places, because that is seriously where you grow. Like, I said I went into that depressive state, and it was really hard. But, like, you know, that's where stuff grows, is in those dark, deep places where you really challenge these concepts that you've been taught and indoctrinated with. But it was, for me, always going towards things that brought me joy, things that were in service of others, and things that brought out the kindness in me. And that was always geared towards, how can I help animals more? How can I be a better person? How can I be more Brece? And it took a long time to identify that. It was a constant state of being uncomfortable, and I was sad for a long time, even with the gender identity stuff. But like, I just want people to realize, even if it does feel like those icky feelings, I promise you that is like the fertilizer. It's the shit. You know, the shit smells, it stinks, it's gross, but it is seriously the fertilizer for you to be the tree.
You know, I think that's why I watched Dominion and Earthlings back to back. I needed some.
You got to see it. You got to go through it.
Now, do you have a quote you want to share?
Ironically, when I was training horses and I was teaching kids how to ride and helping them find their strength and voice and things, I made them recite this quote. And it's funny I said it then, because I wasn't being true to it. Arthur Schopenhauer. Compassion for animals is intimately connected with goodness of character, and it can be confidently asserted that he who is cruel to animals cannot be a good man. So true.